Welcome to today's program, From Birth to Death, New York State Vital Records. My name is Rhonda Hoffman, and I'm the genealogy specialist in the Grosvenor Room. The Grosvenor Room is a special collections department at the Central Library in downtown Buffalo. We have genealogy, local history, maps, music scores, and rare books. You never need to make an appointment to visit us. We're open the same hours as the rest of the library. I should say you never need to make an appointment unless you want to view a rare book, and our online catalog would tell you if something was a rare book or not. So let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to talk about official New York State births, deaths, and marriages, online records, microfilm records in the Grosvenor Room, where to obtain copies. Now we're going to talk about New York City records, and we're going to talk about some of our Grosvenor Room guides that will help you with vital records. So New York City does its own thing, and we're going to talk about New York City at the end. So right now we're talking about everywhere except for New York City. New York State Vital Records officially began in 1880 for deaths, and births and marriages in 1881. Though those were the official starting dates according to New York State law, towns may not have started at the time the law was made. It took a little while for people to start implementing the law. And the Western New York Genealogical Society's website is a great resource for learning when the different towns in Western New York started keeping vital records. So this is an example of what you'd get. So this is if we clicked on Erie County from the Society's website, you can see, for example, Newstead began keeping records in 1887 instead of 1880 or 1881. So what is available for genealogists? There are waiting periods before we can have access to vital records for our genealogy research. Of course, if you want to get a copy of your own certificate, you can do that. But for genealogy, for births, there's at least, the birth record has to be at least 75 years old. And you can only get copies of records for deceased persons, and you may need to prove that that person is deceased in order to get a copy. Marriages, there is a 50-year waiting period, and again, you can only get a certificate if both parties are deceased. And different locations are different in terms of what they might require you to prove. So some municipalities might just make you sign a statement saying, to the best of my knowledge, that this person or persons are deceased. Some other places might be more strict, and they may make you prove that those individuals are deceased. And what the proof that they would require would just depend on the location. So you would want to contact those places individually. Deaths, there's a 50-year waiting period before we can get access to those for genealogy research. Sometimes there are exceptions. Direct line descendants with proof of their lineage and proof of the person's death may be able to get them sooner. And you would want to contact each of the municipalities that hold those records to find out what proof that you would need. You might be wondering, is there an index to the vital records? And yes, there is. The New York State Vital Records Index is what we call it. So there is that index, but that index does not cover New York City. And some cities kept things a little differently. So for births and deaths, the city of Buffalo, Albany, and Yonkers, they're not in that statewide index until 1914. And for marriages, those same three places are not included in that index until 1908. So those individual cities would have indexes to their records, and some of those are online. We have a great guide on the Grosvenor Room's website, Vital Records in the Grosvenor Room, and it tells you about all of those different things that I just told you about, what those indexes cover. So if you can see here, there's an arrow pointing to the New York State Vital Records Index, and this is specifically for births. And you can see it includes what those things that I just told you about Buffalo, Albany, and Yonkers, and how New York City is not included in that index. And it also tells you what databases, if those things are online, what databases you can find those in. So for the birth index, the Ancestry Library Edition or Ancestry.com database includes that index from 1881 to 1942. So we're going to go ahead and go onto Ancestry so we can start looking at the index. So I'm using Ancestry Library Edition. For those of you that live in Erie County, we have access to Ancestry Library Edition at any one of our locations. So you can go into the library and use the library's computers, or you can come into the library with your tablet, laptop, or other device, use the library's Wi-Fi, and you can use this right on your own computer. And then you could download records that you find onto your own computer. So I'm going to start out, which I think is the easiest way to start, and that's to go to the search menu, and they have a birth, marriage, and death category. So I'm going to click there, and that New York State Vital Records Index is in here. So this is a good place to start. But obviously this will include births, marriages, and deaths for all over the United States, what Ancestry has, and actually foreign records as well. So all of the birth, marriage, and death records, it's going to search all over the world. So I'm going to start by putting in a first name and last name, and that is where I usually start. And I'll put in, if I know an approximate birth year, I'll put that in. Maybe you don't know exactly, but you think it's around a certain date. And I like to put in a location of birth if I know what it is. And so this, I'll often put a county in. So this person was born in Erie County, New York, and then I'll click search. So I am searching, I'm hoping to find the birth index here. And she comes right up to the top. You can see New York State Birth Index 1881 to 1942. This is who I was looking for. And so it gives you what you need if you want to order a copy of this record. What you want to know to order a copy of the record is the birthplace, the birth, and the birth date. Let me just open up so you can see the index that this data came from. Sometimes it's not in the best condition. You can see this one's a little bit fuzzy, but you can see here's Meriwether, here's Sylvia, there's her date of birth, and the year will be at the top. And this number is a state certificate number. The state certificate numbers do not correspond with local certificate numbers. The best place to order a vital record is with the city, town, or village where that person was born, married, or died, because usually they're a lot quicker than the state. It can take years. If you order something from the New York State Vital Records Office, it can take years for you to get it. So I always recommend go to the town, village, or city clerk's office and see if they have copies of the records. Usually they will, but sometimes, they may have had some damage to their records, fire or flood, something like that. And they might tell you, oh, we don't have that time frame. And then you'll have to order it from the state usually. I'm going to go back And I'm going to do another search. So let's say you have a really common name. Just go with the classic John Smith. And I'm not sure, let's say I'm not sure exactly where he was born, but it was around 1918, and I know it was New York State. So you can search. And, I got tons of hits. I got over 2 million hits for this. And you can also see that there are different types of records. So you're seeing find a graves listed here. You're seeing newspaper articles. And to filter some of that out, one thing you can do is you can filter specifically to births, baptisms, or christenings. So you get all that marriage and death information out if you were looking for a birth. And then you could even sort things to a specific record set. So here you can see we've got all over the world. You could limit it up top here to a specific country. Let's just do that. And then you can see these options. There's even more. You could click see more, but I see what I'm looking for, and that's the New York State birth index right here. So then that's limiting it just to that index. And you can decide whether one of these is your John Smith. Now, there are other ways that you can access these indexes. One way to do that is by going to the search menu and going to all collections. Now, let's say I might do this if I really don't want to see all those other records, and I just want to search that New York State marriage or birth index. And what I would do is you can come here, make sure you're on USA, and you can go to the state and then click View All New York Research Options. And you can see that Ancestry will break down the different record types. So here's New York birth, marriage, and death. And they only show you a few, but you can see here there's 107 different records here. So then you can look and you can see if what you're looking for is here. You can see there are a number of different records, and you can see for New York State, it's a little tricky because we have New York City and New York State. So when you see New York, that's the city. If you see New York State, then that's going to be the rest of the state. And so I'm looking for births, and you can see here, there's the birth index. And what's nice about looking here is if you're searching that main record set that I had just shown you, and you don't find who you're looking for, you can go here and see what is in Ancestry for the state that you're searching in, just to make sure that what you're looking for is even in Ancestry. Ancestry has tons of resources, but sometimes they don't have what we're looking for. So this is a way to verify, yes, there is the New York State birth index in Ancestry. And then you could click on this database title here, and you could search this record set specifically. So I'm going to do a search here. And I'm going to do a search. And here's what I was looking for. If you click View Record, now you can see that Lucille Wall's name is in parentheses. That means that this information was put in by a user. And I'll show you why they put that in there, because we don't see another name listed, only what's in brackets. So if I look at this image, her birth was listed as August 6, 1911. So we're in 1911. And if we look for Ball, and then we look alphabetically, there's no Lucille listed here. So sometimes, maybe at the time that they took the information for the birth certificate, they hadn't decided on her name yet. So sometimes right in the beginning, you'll see babies by gender with the birth date and the birth location, and they don't have a name yet. So here's Lucille Ball, August 6th in Jamestown. You can see she's listed as a female. So sometimes you'll run across that. Another way to find these record sets, and especially if you get to know what these databases are titled, you can go to search the catalog. And you could find it if you start to know those database names. So I'm just going to put in New York's birth index and click search in the title in the card catalog. And you can see here some listings. So there are a bunch for New York City. You can see there's a few there for New York City. And here's the New York State birth index. So I'm going to do that for deaths. One thing that's a little tricky about the death index for New York State is that there are two of them. There are still a number of things for New York City. You can see all those New Yorks listed, but the second and third listings, they split it up by years. So here's 1852 to 1956 and 1957 to 1972. So they split it up like this because for this time frame here, the state has a computerized database of these deaths. So that's why they're split up like this. So I'm going to look first at this one from 1852 to 1956. Now, I told you that deaths started being kept in the state of New York in 1880, but you can see obviously this dates from 1852. And one of the reasons that we usually see this is because certain towns might have kept things a little bit differently. So those three locations that I told you that were separate for a while, Albany, Buffalo, and Yonkers, the city of Buffalo index is in here. And you can see that Buffalo started keeping some deaths in 1852. And you can see Albany started in 1870. And Yonkers started in 1875. And then there's the New York State Department of Health, and that's that New York State Vital Records Index, the way I call it. And you can see that starts in 1880 and goes up to 1956. I'm just going to do a search to show you the death index. And there she is. And we can open it up. And there she is, Barbara Franklin. A lot of times these indexes are alphabetical, but sometimes they are by a surname, Soundex code, it's a code that groups names that are very similar together. So we can see these different last names, Francano, Franz, French, they're all very similar. So they group them together. And what you do is you look alphabetically by the first names. And then you can see the place of death, you can see the age, and for some years, you'll even see a code for the cause of death. And these codes you can often look up online. There are some, it's called ICD 9 is the current one. It gives these information about these different death codes. There are some historical ones online that you could view to see what that code might be, because they do change over time. Or, if you do order a copy of this death certificate, the cause of death will be listed on that death certificate. So I wanted to do one more search. If you wanted to edit your search, you can click that little pencil there and put in a new search. So here's William McKinley, 1901 in Buffalo. And I wanted to show you this because this is the time frame when Buffalo did keep their records separately, but I showed you that the Buffalo Index is included in this database. So it will look differently, and the Albany and Yonkers ones will look differently if it's for those time frames where they kept them separately. So there you can see President William McKinley, and it gives you a volume, and that's probably a certificate number or a page number, and the years are along the side here. So because this is the local index, this is from the City of Buffalo Inactive Records Center, this information will be helpful. That volume number and is it say a page or a certificate? So a volume and a number and the year, that will be helpful information to give if you make a record request through the City of Buffalo. So next, I'm going to show you the marriages. And again, you can search for the marriages in that main database that I showed you when we first started out. So here's the New York State Marriage Index. So what's nice about using this online index is that it does cross-reference the spouses with each other. So, we've got Irving Berlin, that's who we searched for. And if we were to look at this index, here he is right here. And it only gives the first few letters of his wife's name here. But because this is computerized, it cross-references so you can see the full name of the spouse. And sometimes even if someone was remarried, like you might see that this woman remarried, and you might see her listed under a couple of different surnames here too. So that's kind of a nice bonus to the online records. Now, we do have in the Grosvenor Room, we do have these indexes. So we have these indexes on microfiche. And there are numerous libraries across the state that do have this actual microfiche index. Sometimes if you don't find someone that you're looking for, it could be because this is in poor condition. Sometimes this is very faded around the war years, especially around World War II years. This index was very faded. And even in Ancestry, even though they tried to optimize the images, this might look all mostly like white space, or it might be super fuzzy. And a computer is what indexed these records. So if you're not finding who you're looking for, you could go to one of the libraries that has this microfiche. So we have it in the Grosvenor Room. And sometimes our microfiche copy will be in a little bit better condition than what it is that they scanned. And sometimes when you then if you put it on our microfilm machines where you can play with all the different settings, lighting and contrasts and all of that, it becomes readable, even though it still might be faint, but it becomes readable. So a lot of the libraries that have their own genealogy departments across the state especially will have this, like Rochester has it and Syracuse has it, and some other places across the state have it too. So I wanted to go back into the card catalog, and I wanted to show you there is this other record set in here that includes some New York actual marriage certificates. And that is this record set right here, New York, US County Marriage Records. And there might be a few in the 1840s, but mainly they're from 1907 to 1936. So for that time frame, there was a New York state law where the municipalities had to give copies of the marriage certificates to the county clerks. And a lot of those have been digitized and put on Ancestry. So not all of the counties are in here though. So what you want to do is go to browse this collection and view what is in here. Now you'll notice Albany isn't in here. And look at, unfortunately, Erie County isn't in here, but there's all of these other counties are in here. So if you guys are doing Western New York, all of the other counties are in here. And it's easy to search. Just like the other database, I would put in the person's name. And maybe you don't know when they're married, but you know both of their names. And you think, oh, they were probably married in the county they lived in. These folks were married in Chautauqua County. And you'll find you might get multiple hits. And you can see that this isn't a marriage record, but Viola, she was underage. So this is a certificate of consent from her mother. So her mom, Mrs. Cora Wilkins Kennedy, it's giving permission because Viola was under 18 years of age. So she gave permission for Viola to get married. I'm going to go back to our results, and there are other records here. So I'm going to click on the second hit here. And this is where you're going to see a lot of that great information that you're hoping to find, that Earl and Viola both lived in Fredonia. And it gives their date, 26th of February, 1914. And then you've got all that personal information where you'll see their ethnicity, where they live, their ages. You can see Viola was 16. Occupations, he was a farmer. Their places of birth, Westfield and then Avon, New York, and their parents' names. And usually it will include the mother's maiden names. Unfortunately, it only lists the country of birth on this particular marriage, but sometimes you'll see a state, or oftentimes if they were married in New York State, you'll see a specific town that they were born in, how many times they were married. One kind of trick that I do with this is sometimes maybe you know your ancestor's name and you're not sure of all of their siblings' names. Actually, let me just go back. So if you start on this main screen, and let's say that you want to find other children of a particular couple, you could search for the parents' names And you don't have to put any information up here. So you could search for someone's parents' names to see if there are siblings that you don't know about, maybe. So I'm putting in James Bentley and Elizabeth Ray. And you can hover over it and you can see, oh yeah, it's got both of the names. So there's a Benjamin, there's a James. So you can find these other siblings, maybe. So I mentioned that if you do find your ancestors in these indexes, the best place to go first is the city, town, or village clerk where the event took place. And sometimes even then, even though these indexes list the place where they were married, sometimes, especially if sometimes there's a village and a town that have the same names, like Franklinville in Cattaraugus County. Sometimes you're not sure if it was the village or the town. So you might call one place and they'll say, no, we don't, the town, and they'll say, no, we don't have it. Try the village. And that was the case with one that I did recently. So I had to go to the village clerk. Sometimes you'll find that one of those locations keeps all of those records. So sometimes the town will keep both the town records and the village records. One time recently, I found a location in the death index, and it was a small town in Cattaraugus County, and they were right next to Olean, which that's where the county clerk's office was, and the town clerk's office. Um, and I went to that small town, and they said, no, we don't have it. Around that time, most people died in the hospital, so you go to Olean because they'll probably have a copy of that. So sometimes the index can be off a little bit. And I did go and I did get a copy of that from Olean. They did have that record, even though it said it was registered in a different town in that index. So to get a copy of a record, it may cost as much as $22 if you know the date of the event. Some places will charge you, like if you ordered through the state, they'll do a 3-year search for $22. But if you needed a 20-year search, it's $22 for every 3 years. Luckily, we have these indexes online now. But sometimes the local offices won't charge you this much. Like I recently got one from Alden, New York, and it was free. And I got one from Genesee County, and it only cost me $6. So it just depends on that local clerk as far as what they might charge. When you do get copies, I always ask the clerk if you can get a photocopy or take a photograph of the record, because sometimes their go-to is that they have these forms that they type out by staff. And you don't know how experienced the staff member is with reading that old handwriting. You want to make sure they don't miss something. So if you can, ask them for a photocopy. Sometimes that's not possible because they have really big books that just are too big to put on a copy machine. But like the Franklinville village clerk, she just took my phone and took a picture of the record for me, which was great because then I knew everything would be, as it was on the original certificate. And of course, it's always best to view the original document or a reproduction. So we do have different records. For those of you that have Erie County research, we do have microfilmed vital records in the Grosvenor room. And I did mention, just as a reminder, when you're looking in that state vital records index, that certificate number that you're given is the state certificate number. So that's helpful if you do have to order a copy of something from the state. But if you go to a local office, that number is not going to mean anything to them. There's going to be a different number for their own records. So this number here, this is the state certificate number. So one record that we have some City of Buffalo birth records. We have from 1878 and 1879 and 1881 is mainly this record set. There's a few from 1880. We've actually digitized these, and they are online for anyone to use. You don't need to have a card with us. There's no fee or anything. And I'm going to show you how to get to our digital collections at the end. These are birth returns, and they often don't name the child. But if you know the parents' names, so you can see John and Maria Miller here. And also, or if you knew the family's address, you can see the birth occurred at 50 Mulberry Street. Most people for this early time frame, they would have been born at home. Sometimes, this is more rare, but sometimes you'll see on these records where the child's name was added. So here's Edwin Coddington Hayes was the name of this child, even though it wasn't originally listed here. Some of them, they are more detailed. And so you can see that we have the name of the, actually, we don't have the name of the child, but they do include a little more information about where the parents were born. And this is more rare, but this actually lists a specific town in Germany where the father was born. I find that when this does occur, a lot of times where that person was born, if you look at the ethnicity of the midwife or doctor, they were often of the same ethnicity, and they decided to be more specific with the place of birth. Usually it'll just say a foreign country if they were born outside of the United States. Part of that record set that's digitized, there are a little over 50 births before 1877, from 1850 to 1877. They're not in the best condition. So you can see this one was all taped up. So those earlier ones aren't in great condition, but there are some earlier ones in here. And you might run across that some of them are in Old German script. So see, I can't read that. But sometimes they wrote in, regular script, the names. So if there are any Old German speakers who might want to volunteer, that would be really helpful to us. We do have an index to the records, but some of them we couldn't read. We did our best, but some of them we didn't read. What's nice about the index that we created is that we underlined, if we weren't sure, that handwriting was really bad, if we weren't sure, we would underline something. And sometimes, if we're like, that is really weird, something doesn't look quite right, we looked and tried to verify those names in the city directories or census records. And so you'll see those notes that we made here. There's also another collection of City of Buffalo birth certificates. These date from 1881 to 1913, and these are in the collection of the Western New York Genealogical Society. There's no index to this microfilm, but there is an index online on the Internet Archive for some of these. For the earliest years, those indexes, they don't correspond. They give a volume and a certificate number, but our microfilm doesn't have a volume and certificate number on for the earliest records, but then later on they do. So sometimes that index is helpful and sometimes it's not. It's on the Internet Archive if you were to look for Buffalo birth index, and that's going to be on your handout. These are roughly in order by date. So if, a lot of people will just go in if they know the date of birth and just search through these. This is just you might see different formats. So this is just a little bit of a different format for the birth certificate. We do have delayed birth records for Buffalo. This is also in the Genealogical Society collection. A lot of people signed up for a delayed birth record in order to prove their date of birth for Social Security or for military service. And what a delayed birth is that when you were born, if you didn't have a birth record filed. So even though New York State started keeping birth records in 1881, the laws were not fully complied with until 1914. So especially the really early ones, like in the 1880s and early 1890s, you'll see a lot of people that just they didn't have a birth record filed for them. So later on, they could file a delayed birth record that gave information. And let me just zoom in here. So here's the top of it. And so they could provide some kind of proof of their birth. And you can see over here to the right, it says confirmed by, and baptismal certificate was listed as okay. So that's what they used. And you can see here, St. Paul's Evangelical Church in Eggertsville, New York. So that is where the person was baptized. So now you know where to get a copy of that baptism too. They might have used a family Bible, military records, or even a library record could be used. And usually there would be someone, a family member who could testify to the person's age. And so up here, it's great because you'll learn a family relationship. So this Christian Hoffert, and it gives the address. And it says that that person is 76 years old. And it's the person's aunt. So now you know some family relationships. And then here's the information about the person's whose delayed birth certificate this is. So her name was Elizabeth Ribel. And you get the information about the parents and where the parents were born. And you'll get the signature of that family member will be down here usually. So those, there's no index to them, but they're arranged by year of birth and then in alphabetical groupings. We have Erie County marriage records, part of the Genealogical Society's collection. These date from 1877 to 1935. I apologize. I don't know why I must have kept that no index in there from the birth records. I apologize. There is an index to these records. And this is what an early one will look like. So this one isn't too exciting. You see that Carl Geim, it does say he was born in Lyons Ranch, age 36, and Mary Klein of Buffalo, who was born in, it gives a specific place in Germany, which is usually rare in her age. And it gives the date of the marriage and it gives the officiant. So that's helpful. So you can look up this reverend and see what church he was associated with in the city directories. Then you could maybe the church marriage might include even more information about these individuals. And as time goes on, these records become more detailed. So this is 1881, where we're going to learn their occupations, their place of birth, their parents' names, how many times they'd been married before. Here's one from 1910. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see, it gives all that great information. And it will tell information about former marriages. And I thought this one was really unique. For the bride, it lists that she's not seen nor heard from her husband for 9 last succeeding years, and she doesn't know whether he's alive or dead. And then we have information, this is the other page to this record where it's going to list the witnesses and the officiant with their address. So again, you could look up the clergyman's name and see if he was associated with a particular church. And this is another example of those certificate of consents that you might find in these records. So if someone was under the age of 18, the parent or guardian would have had to give consent. Here's another type of marriage. And here you can see that it will list if a person had an annulment or were divorced, it would list that information here. So this is really helpful. So you can see the date that this annulment took place, and it took place in Buffalo. Oftentimes you can find these types of records at the clerk's office, the county clerk's office, if you wanted to follow up on a divorce. This is just an example from 1931. And this gives great birth information. So it's possible, this year you can find out the person's exact date of birth. And I do like to point out, because a lot of people get excited and they just want to dive in. There are indexes to these records. And most of the years for these Erie County marriages in the beginning of the book, they have an index to an index. So if the surname that you were looking for began with the letter A, you would go to this A section, say it was Abbott. Then you go down to the second letter, B, and then you go to the third letter, B. And this is the page number that you would look in the index for that surname. Some of the others are in alphabetical groupings, and our staff could help you, but just know you don't have to just start browsing by year or by date. You want to look in the index to the index, because Buffalo was a big city back then. So you don't want to waste time. And we do have a guide to using these marriage records, and staff are always available to assist you. We have some Buffalo Justice of Peace records from 1837 to 1876, again in the Genealogy Society collection. It's just for the city of Buffalo. They're not super detailed, but at least you know the bride and groom names. Sometimes it will say where they were born or where they lived, and it'll have the date of the marriage. And I did want to mention that New York State did try enforcing the keeping of vital records in 1847, but very few locations complied. Some of them complied from 1847 to 1849, but all of them stopped by 1851. So there's very few of these records, but there are some floating around out there. This is one of our guides. It's called the Early Genealogy Sources for Buffalo and Erie County. And there's a section in the guide for the Western New York Genealogical Society's journal. And they did index some of these records for Erie County. So it tells you, so there were some for Alden that were indexed, the births, marriages, and deaths. And those transcriptions were published in their journal December of 1983. So then we have the journal obviously at the library, and then you could find that transcribed record here. If you want to learn more about the history of New York State vital records, a great place to look is the New York Family History Research Guide and Gazetteer. We have it here in the Grosvenor Room. We have a circulating copy, so you could borrow it. You could borrow it if you live in the county. You could have it put on hold and sent to whatever location is closest to you. Or you could interlibrary loan it too. If you are from another library system, you can go through your library, interlibrary loan, and we would loan it out to you. So next, New York City. So New York City does things a little differently. In the more recent years, they changed what's publicly available. It used to follow those same time frames as the rest of the state, but they've become more restrictive. So for birth records, there's 125 years a waiting period, and marriages, it is 50 years. Deaths, there's a 75-year waiting period to get access to these records. But what's great is there is a historical archive through the New York City Department of Records and Information Services. They have a lot of these records online. And so there's going to be a link to this on your handout. There's different ways to search it. There's by certificate number, if you happen to know the certificate number. These are, there is an index to these in Ancestry where you could learn the certificate number. But if you don't know a certificate number, you could search by name. So you would just search by births, deaths, and marriages, whatever it was you were looking for. And you can put in the last name. You don't have to put in a first name, but you do have to click a borough, which you may or may not know. But if you do know the borough, you could put that in there. And you could put in the date if you wanted to, but let's say I wanted to just search like this, you could do that. So here's some Polchinskis that were from the Bronx. And you can see they're really, really nice quality scans. So you could download that right here to your computer. You can rotate it so you can read it better. And if you wanted to, I'm going to go back into Ancestry, but you could search in that birth, marriage, death index, that main index. So I've got New York City as the location, the birth, and the name. And sometimes, you know, this is a good way to find out what borough it is too, because you can just choose New York City. Oops, I shouldn't have done that exact. So this is who I was looking for. And there's the certificate number. And now you know the borough if you didn't know that before. So you could do birth certificate number 126, Bronx, and the year. Nope, that didn't work out. Interesting. I swear I did it earlier and it worked. Did I put in the wrong number? Oh, I'm sorry. It wasn't 126. I won't show you it again, but it was supposed to be 276, not 126. I apologize. It will work. Lastly, I wanted to show you the library's website. So buffalolib.org is our main website, and you can click on research and resources. And this is where you can get to the special collections website, so the website of the Grosvenor Room. And first I'll show you our guides. You can see we have a lot of categories. Here's the vital and related records, and vital records for Buffalo and Erie County. That's where you're going to find a lot of detail, and you'll find exactly what database to look in Ancestry if you wanted to see that information. So let me just go down to marriages. So you can see it tells you all that information that I told you about the Erie County Clerk's marriage records. It has information about what is going to be included in that New York State Vital Records Index. It tells you the Ancestry Library Edition database, what the name of that is. And it has, a birth, marriage, and death section. And then at the end, if you're looking for that New York City Vital Records information, it's got all that information on there, as well as some other sources of births, marriages, and deaths for across the state, what we might have in the Grosvenor room. And let me just go back, and I wanted to show you how to access our digital collections. So from the Grosvenor Room's website, if you go to digital collections, we've featured the City of Buffalo birth records, which is what I wanted to show you. But when that becomes not a feature anymore, if you go to browse by category and you go to genealogy and hit apply, then you'll see City of Buffalo birth records. For some of you that have used it in the past, we do have a different look. And you can see here are those indexes. So there's an index by child's last name, and then there's an index by date of birth. And on your handout, there's going to be a link to a short video on how to search these records. So you can do that on your own if you decide you want to learn how to search these.